Let's learn about tables. Tables have a unique history behind them. So when web pages first started out, we used tables to create different layouts, to create columns and headers and footers and things like that. And then all of a sudden, everything was good and we had some sort of technological boom or revolution. And this thing called a mobile device just sort of popped up. And all of a sudden, we had to take a web page that could, have a size like this and cram it down into something really tiny. And tables don't really have the ability to be, well, that's called responsive. So they can't go from really big to really small. Now we'll learn all about responsive design a little bit later and what responsiveness is. But for the time being, we should really just know that tables are a way to display data, whether it wants to be in a table or you want to use it as an entire layout for an entire page. That's totally up to you. But in today's ecosystem, when we're making a website, we actually don't use tables very often unless it's for a very particular case. And even then, you really only see it on government websites or larger organizations who are a lot more conservative. Generally, you won't see tables on a modern type website. You'll see something that looks like a bunch of divs, and with a bunch of CSS and responsiveness, we can sort of snap it down into different rows instead of having them in columns for mobile devices. That said, just because tables aren't really used in websites anymore doesn't mean that they're completely useless. There are two very common scenarios that we use tables for almost every single day. Number one is emails. Because email is basically, it's a dinosaur of a technology. It's so old and it hasn't really kept up with browsers that we can't really use all sorts of responsive tricks with CSS and JavaScript and whatnot. We have to simply use tables. So basically every email that you open is going to use a table. And the other one is PDFs. And because PDFs are somewhat of an older technology and somewhat proprietary, it's harder to make a PDF responsive. Actually, it's impossible to make a PDF responsive because it's a document. It's not a web page, it's a document. And so a PDF needs to have a specific type of structure in it where you have maybe a column for branding and then a bunch of text down one side of it, and maybe a header and a footer, page number, things like that. And so we use tables for a lot of PDFs as well. Now, you probably won't be writing tables, you won't be using tables every single day as a web developer, but it is important to know how they work, and it is important to have that accessible. That knowledge needs to be accessible for when you do have to create an email template or just work with a table for whatever reason. Maybe it's a pricing table and you're working with an older client who says, no, we absolutely need a table for whatever reason, and there are reasons out there. So we are going to be learning about tables in this video. There's going to be a lot to take in, so don't feel bad if you have to watch this video twice. Feel free to ask questions, and you're going to want to really practice this one at the end. I'm going to give you a task, but that task might not actually cover enough, so you might want to tinker around on your own time as well. So let's go ahead and get started right now. So I have my editor open here, and I am going to create a new file and save it as table.html. I'm going to create an HTML tag, a head tag, a title tag. Let's call it tables. And let's go down and let's add some body in here. Body stuff. And in here, let's add our doc type. Now let's open up table.html and we'll see, yeah, there's not really anything in here. And that's okay. So when we create a table, we are dealing with rows and columns. We're also dealing with a table header, a table body, and a table footer. And we can mix and match all of these different things. So we are going to create a 4x4 table, 4 columns with 4 rows. So we start this off with a element called table. It takes an opening and closing tag, so it's not like an image or a BR or an HR. It is an opening and closing tag. Inside of this, we have a thing called a TR, a table row. And so now we are actually starting to see that when we were learning about lists requiring at least 2 elements to create a list, we can see this same pattern with a table. So we have a table and we have a table row. And then inside of each table row, we also have a TD element, which is basically just a data cell. It's just a cell inside of your element. Think of an Excel spreadsheet, and it's just one particular cell. So this is going to be cell number 1, and we're going to do the same thing again, cell number 2 and cell number 3. And so these take an opening and closing tag. So you've got a TD here and a TD over here, closing TD. But unlike our lists where we had an ordered list, an OL, and then an LI, and then our text, this one has a table row, and then cells. And then if we wanted to add another row, we just simply take this entire row and copy and paste it. Instead, I'm going to write this out. Let's do it. TR, so all I did was hit TR and then tab, and that will create a TR for me. And let's fix some of this indenting. And let's call this, I'm going to want to fix this up. So let's do this. We want to call this row 1. And this one, I'm going to select all of these, row 2. And let's see what this looks like in Firefox. Okay, well that is a terrible example because this really just looks like a bunch of inline elements and block elements. So let's go ahead and add a border of 1. So this border attribute will give us a 1 pixel border all the way around. I believe this attribute is actually deprecated. It should work for the foreseeable future, but eventually, one day, this will be removed. So here we go. We have all these different cells in here. Now let's go ahead and make this bigger. Let's make the width of this entire table 100%. And by adding that percent sign, it's going to take up 100% of the width from the left to the right of the page. And so now we can see row 1, cells 1 through 4, row 2, cells 1 through 4, and we can copy this 2 more times. So let's go ahead, paste that. Let's go ahead and paste that because I am a stickler for indentation. And row 3, let's do this. And row 4, refresh our page, and there we go. We have 4 rows and 4 cells in each row. Now that is the basis of a table, and it only gets more complicated from here. Now, because this is all sort of the body of our table and we don't really have a header, let's go ahead and create a header. So we're going to create a new table row, a TR, and we are going to create a TH, a table header cell. And this is by default going to be bold. So we've got column 1 and then TH, column 2, and then another TH, column 3, copy and paste that row, change a 3 to a 4. And there we go. It also centers the text for us right out of the box. So we have something to work with here. We have a header, we have a bunch of body stuff in here, just like our HTML structure, where we have a head and a body. We also have the same thing for a table, and we're going to add those in just a moment. And lastly, I'm going to take this table row from the very top and put it at the very bottom. And I'm going to change this to say, instead of column, it's going to say footer title. Doesn't really matter what the text is at this point because this is just for demonstration. So now we have a column at the top that's bold and centered. We've got 4 of them right across in our row. We have a 4x4 grid in here, and we have footer elements as well. So table heads for footers. Now I had mentioned that a table has a head, a body, and a footer, a lot like what our HTML structure has, where it has a head and a body. So let's go ahead and add that head. Let's type in th head. And we are simply going to move this stuff up 1 line. So now we have table, table head, tr, and then a th. And when we refresh our page, ideally, nothing changes. And all we're doing here is we're telling the browser that, hey, this is the header. This is the head of the table. It's not just another row, and it's not just another row with bolded text in it. It's actually the head. It's important. And likewise, for a body, we can add tbody. Grab all of our rows and move them up 1. And so all of our rows now live in here. Let's minimize that. And let's add the last one, tfoot. So when we refresh our page, we're not going to see any difference. But when we inspect our element, our browser is saying there's a table, there's a head, there's a body, and there is a footer. And although we can't visually see the difference, semantically, it does make sense to help the browser out. If you don't need to make the browser do extra work, don't make it do extra work. And for search engines, this is incredibly helpful because a search engine might scrape your page and say, okay, well, I just want to see the top 4 subjects of a particular debate or something. And maybe those are in the columns. Or maybe actually a better example would be the names of 4 people in a debate about any particular subject. So you've got debater 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then you've got subjects underneath them, and if they did well, if they didn't do well, something like that. And search engines will make use of that data.